Welcome back to Lesson 11 on interfaces. Earlier in some of the previous lessons we talked about inheritance, how you can have a class as a base class and then have another class that inherits from that base class. In C#, however, there is no such thing as multiple inheritance as there is in C++ and other languages. This idea of being able to basically inherit from multiple classes. So in C#, you can only have a single inheritance from that direct class. Now you can chain them. You could have class A inheriting from class B, which inherits from class C, but you couldn't have class A inheriting from both class B and C. But what the designers have come up with is something called an interface. And with interfaces, you can have multiple inherit. You can inherit from multiple interfaces. So that's kind of their answer to multiple inheritance, is through interfaces. So let's talk a little bit about interfaces. Of course, there's lots of reasons to use interfaces, and the one that we're going to show right now is kind of similar to being able to use a delegate, but in such a manner that it's across an entire class as opposed to just one method. So you can kind of think of it when we went to talk about delegates, where delegates were used for decoupling the caller from the callee. Interfaces can also be used for that decoupling process. And the way that you would want to pick whether you want to use a delegate or an interface is, are you just going to have one method that you're decoupling, or are you having like an entire class that you want to decouple? If it's an entire class, you want to use interfaces. So with that, let's go ahead and show what these interfaces are. I'm going to go ahead and declare this public in this namespace. And it's called an interface, so we just use the keyword interface. And let's see here. Let's make one. The common convention is to start the naming with an I, so that people using it will know that it's not a normal class, but that it's an interface. Although that's just the convention. You don't have to do that. Although it's a strong convention, so you definitely want to do that. So, and you generally want to put in here what sort of action or what sort of thing that you want that this one can do. For this example, we're just going to call it bakeable. So basically, classes that inherit this interface would be things that could be baked in this situation. Inside the interface, you don't actually give any code. You basically just give methods and method signatures and properties that it has to have. So in this situation, we're going to say that whatever has this interface has to have a couple of things for it. It has to have let's see, we're going to create a couple methods. We're going to call one called mix. Notice that we're just giving the signature, and we're not actually implementing it. Let's have another one called bake, where we're going to put in a string of ingredients. Okay, so that's it for our interface. Very, very simple. You might think, okay, that's kind of weird, but it'll make more sense. Just basically focus on the idea that the reason you create these interfaces is to guarantee that when someone calls into your method, that they could provide any sort of class as long as it fits within, as long as it has that interface in the class, applied to the class, inherits to that interface. So you know that it'll have a mix and a bake function in it. So let's go ahead and create another class called cake. And a cake is going to be bakeable. So we're going to inherit from that bakeable interface right there. So basically, this cake, now by implementing this interface, you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to have a mix method and a bake method inside of here. In fact, there's a shorthand. If you right-click on this iBakeable, you can implement the interface and click it like that. Click on the implement this, and it goes ahead and creates the methods that are contained inside of this interface. Although it creates them such as follows, so that it'll actually throw an exception unless you put something, unless you come through here and actually implement these methods. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and consume this thing here. Making a cake with these ingredients. Oops. And we're going to list the ingredients that we've got here. Okay. So that's what a cake will do. That's what a cake is going to do. So if we come over here, back to our form where we're going to consume this, we're going to basically say, okay, let's have a method here called bake. And instead of hardwiring in that you have to give it a cake to pass in, so we don't want to give it a cake because potentially we're actually going to come down here and create a class called donut. In fact, later on someone could come back and create whatever classes they wanted to. Let's do the same thing with this one here. So instead of basically saying send me a cake in here, like follows, we're going to actually say, okay, as long as it has that interface, iBakeable, bake item, then you can pass it into this method right here, which is really powerful because it basically decouples, like I said, like I keep repeating, it decouples the caller from the callee, which is really nice. It took me a while to figure out some good uses for an interface, besides multiple inheritance, which I didn't really need to use. But the fact that it can decouple it, that's what's very strong for me. So we're going to bake something. As long as it can be baked, it can accept this. First thing that we need to do with this bake item is we need to mix it up. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to bake it. We're also going to need to pass some ingredients to it. And that's all we need to do. We're leaving it up to the person who created the class to implement what is required for baking that cake, because baking the cake can do lots of different things. We're making it up to the person, the individual that creates their classes. Over here, someone can come in later and create another sort of bakeable item. We're leaving it up to them to determine, what they need to do. We're just going to go ahead and be able to bake it right here. So when we click our button, we're going to go ahead and create a cake. And let's go ahead and create a donut. And let's go ahead and use our bake method that we have down at the bottom. And we need to pass in an iBakeable item, which the cake would be one of those things. And let's pass in some ingredients. Let's pass in, for a cake, we need some milk, sugar, throw in some flour there, and let's go ahead and bake the donut as well. Oops. And for donuts we need sprinkles and sugar. Toss in some glaze as well. Okay, so over here, the only thing that we have to do remaining is on the donut we need to basically fix these right here so we don't get exceptions. And we need to figure out what we're going to do. What does it take to bake a donut? Let's just make this really generic. We don't have to mimic this cake over here. The only thing that's important is that we have these two methods. But for this example, I'm going to go ahead and mimic it. I'm making a cake. Donut. These so that's simple enough. It looked like a lot of work for basically getting this small result, but the concept is important, that you're saying, I want to call this bake class, but I don't want to force someone to pass in just one type of item, such as a cake or a donut. I want them to pass in anything that is iBakeable. So anything that has that interface, anything that can be baked, you can pass into me. Let's go ahead and fire this example up here. Let's see where we got a problem here. Okay, so these are automatically public, so we don't need to declare that. Let's see if it likes it now. Interfaces by their nature are going to be public, otherwise, because it by itself does nothing. So it basically saying, hey, I know it's going to be public, don't stick that on there because it's not necessary. Okay, let's see what happens here. Let's hit that. Let's take a look at our output. So the first one that we did was to bake the cake. The next one is donut. Down here we have I'm baking a cake with those ingredients. The next one is I'm baking a donut, or I'm making a donut. And notice that we call the same method, but we pass two different classes to it. Two completely different classes. The common thing that they have is that they're both iBakeable. They both have that common interface, and that's what's important. So I hope you learned something today about interfaces, and hopefully you'll be able to use them in your code.